So there are a lot of things that people don't necessarily acknowledge because they think of trauma as like combat, or they think of it as like something really, really bad happening that, that's like very, very dramatic.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be. So in the study, we delineated between big traumas and little traumas. And we found that there was a high correlation between high functioning depression and trauma.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to Real, the Expert series. Today, I am beyond excited about our guest. Her name is Dr. Judith Joseph, and if you don't already know her, you are definitely going to be reading her book after this episode. Dr. Judith is a board-certified psychiatrist and researcher. She has her own lab, which is so impressive and amazing, and it's all women. I want to be part of it. Can I intern for her? She specializes in mental health and trauma with notable positions at Columbia University and NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And she also recently published her book, which I just told you about, High Functioning, Overcome Your Hidden Depression and Reclaim Your Joy. And I am so excited for you guys to hear my episode with her today. I hope you enjoy, and be sure to go follow her and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Enjoy. I am here with Dr. Judith Joseph today, and I could not be more excited. Thank you so much for coming on to Real.
I'm excited too. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I met you, when was it? Maybe like a year ago. Do you remember?
Yeah, it was through the TikTok and the UN,
right?
Yeah,
yeah, like a UN, TikTok, Maybelline, some type of event. But just hearing you speak after that, I was like, okay, I need to follow her. And everything that you've posted and talked about since then, especially with your book coming out. This is her book, if anyone wants to get it. It's called High Functioning. Everything that you talk about is so incredible and really approachable, and I really appreciate that. So
thank you.
I'm so
that was
excited.
so much fun, and you had a lot of key insights about mental health and your personal journey. So
I appreciate
it was fun, and we helped people.
Yeah, exactly. I want to dive right into high functioning depression because I feel like you would think so many people would know about it, but nobody knows about it, and so many people are suffering from it. So can you talk a little bit about what is high-functioning depression and what are some of those key symptoms?
Yeah, so high-functioning depression is not yet in the medical literature, but people know about clinical depression, or major depressive disorder, which is basically you have all these symptoms of depression, like you feel sad, or some people don't feel sad at all. They just feel nothing. They feel anhedonia, which is a lack of joy and interest in things that they used to enjoy, but they no longer have pleasure in those things. Also, other symptoms like low concentration, low appetite, not sleeping well, guilt, hopelessness, all these symptoms of depression. And then at the bottom of the checklist, they have to meet criteria for not functioning or reduced functioning, or they have to basically be in distress. So if you have all those symptoms of depression at the top, but then you don't have do your symptoms cause you to break down, or are you in crisis or distress, then your doctor will be like, well, you don't really meet criteria.
Right.
And oftentimes they'll say, well, come back when you do break down, right? So I thought, okay, I'm seeing all these people in my lab, in my practice, who have these symptoms, but they're not breaking down. They're doing the opposite. They're like killing it. They're doing well at school. They're showing up for their kids, their family, but yet they lack joy and they have these symptoms. Why don't we also try to support those people and understand what it is about them? Why don't they break down? How do we prevent them from breaking down so that they're not in crisis? And that led me to do this first clinical research study in high functioning depression in the world that's peer reviewed. And I wrote a book about it.
Wow, that's incredible. And I feel like with women specifically, but with everyone, I always hear people complaining about fatigue. I'm so tired. How have you seen that show up in your research in connection with high functioning?
Yeah, well, fatigue and low energy is a symptom of depression. And when I explain that to people, they're like, oh, they don't realize that a lot of different symptoms go into depression. So one of those symptoms is feeling slow or fatigued. But in the same clinical diagnosis, someone else with depression could be the opposite of that. Some people have what's called an anxious depression, where they're actually more restless and jumpy, right? And so there's something called, it's like psychomotor agitation, which is like restlessness and jumpiness. And then there's psychomotor retardation, which is slowness. It's a fancy way of saying like you're slow, like it's hard to get out of bed. But also just having low energy, even if you're a busybody, is a symptom of depression. So being tired can be related to depression, but it's also a symptom of other like medical conditions and other psychiatric conditions. Like being tired could be also a part of anxiety, because when you're so stressed, eventually your body's just like, oh, I can't. I'm so tired from being so stressed.
Right. Yeah, I actually see that a lot, even with myself. Like, I feel like when I'm anxious, I feel exhausted because that anxiety, it's like it always has to come down. How do you then separate what's depression and what's anxiety?
Yeah, it's very common. And usually people are surprised when I'm like, you could have both because they travel together.
Right.
But depression in itself, clinical major depressive disorder or, symptoms of depression has their own set of like list criteria.
Right.
And then anxiety has a separate list. And a lot of the symptoms of anxiety are very physical. So things like, does your stomach hurt? Like things like, is your heart racing? And other things like feeling as if you can't catch your breath. A lot of anxiety symptoms are very, very physical.
Right.
Because you're so stressed in your brain sends messages to the rest of your body, and then the mind-body connection is at work. Whereas depression, clinical depression, doesn't have as many physical symptoms. Like, yes, I mentioned like some slowness, but it really doesn't have those physical symptoms in the diagnoses.
Interesting. Because I originally, when I was even going to talk to you about this, I was like, okay, what are the physical manifestations of depression? But you're saying it kind of doesn't actually come up as much?
It doesn't. Yeah. In the actual like checklist in the DSM, which is like the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatry, under major depressive disorder, the only real physical symptoms are like tiredness, low energy, and also like that either psychomotor agitation or retardation.
Yeah.
Those are the physical symptoms. Now, there are symptoms like people report, not being able to sleep, not being able to eat, but those are not the same as like with anxiety, where it's like you can have palpitations, shortness of breath, headaches, feeling as if like you're about to faint.
Right.
Those are all with generalized anxiety disorder.
Gotcha. Okay. With women, I see that like this definitely comes up more, I feel like. Why is that? And why have you found that women, I feel like, that suffer from this perfectionism happen to also fall into the high functioning depression realm?
Yeah, that is a good point, because women are twice as likely to have depression and anxiety compared to men. And it could be explained like through the biopsychosocial model. So biologically, women have hormones that fluctuate monthly. Right. Our progesterone, our estrogen constantly up and down compared to men who don't have that. And also women go through periods of vulnerability, like not just the periods, but like postpartum and then perimenopause and menopause. And those hormonal fluctuations impact us more. So biologically, we're at risk. And then psychologically, we're at risk because society puts all that pressure on us to, perform, to be perfect. And that stress can be overwhelming. We also have higher rates of trauma compared to men. We have like more, SA in our demographic. Yeah. And then socially, like what's happening in the environment, there's like a lot of misogyny. There's just, we don't get paid the same. There's a lot of reasons. Yeah. In addition to those cultural reasons of having to be perfect and show up and just put up with more. So we're just set up for, I think, less happiness in general. Yeah. But it's validating. It can be depressing to talk about it, but it's actually validating because then you understand, okay, these are all the reasons why, versus just not knowing why and then being like, well, that sucks.
Yeah. No, I've been like in my own life kind of unpacking this need to be the good one, the perfect one. And I found that there's such a connection to a lot of the symptoms that it talks about. And so that's why I feel like with so many people, it's overlooked. But then it's like, where do we start if we're like constantly, I feel like, gaslighting ourselves into just keeping on? Where do we even begin to try to heal?
Well, I often say, understand the science of your happiness, right? Because there's only one you, and there will only ever be one you. Literally, in the future of the universe and in the history of the universe, only one you. So the chances of you existing are so small to begin with. Just know that you're here for a reason. And then try to understand where it is that you're losing your joy. Because I think, at least for me, when I was first going through high functioning depression, I just thought, well, why am I going through this? There must be something I'm doing wrong, right? Initially, self-blame and, internalized shame. But then I would be like, okay, this worked for someone else. Let me try it. Right. This worked for someone else. Let me try it. But I wasn't really understanding, well, I shouldn't be trying things without understanding where I'm losing joy to begin with, right? So if you don't know where you're losing your joy, then you don't know how to add it back strategically. So look at your life. And I use the biopsychosocial as like a fingerprint. Like no two fingerprints are the same. So like literally I'll have my patients draw out their own biopsychosocials. Because this, like when we write up evaluations for patients, we give them their biopsychosocial in like a nice write-up after evaluating them. No one ever reads that. Right. Like I'll be like, it's in the section of your biopsychosocial. And they're like, what?
Yeah, what is
Just
that?
tell me it, So like I actually have my patients sit and like write out the circles. And I'm like, okay, let's go through your biology. What in your biology, what in your medical history, where do you think you're losing your joy there? And then the person may have asthma, right? And then like they're constantly like anxious about like their asthma attacks, or they could have an autoimmune condition,
right?
Or it could be like hormones, like once a month they really break down, right? So understand biologically what's happening. And then I'll literally ask them to write psychology, like, well, do you have ADHD? Because maybe like you're masking all day and that's why you're tired and don't want to do anything when you come home, right? Or like, do you have unprocessed trauma and that you just try to outrun it and you're not facing it and you're in fight or flight all day? What's your attachment style? Like, do you pick people who may not be the best for you because of previous attachment to unhealthy caregivers, So like really understand psychology. And write out your social stuff. Like, are you getting movement? Are you eating foods that are healthy or are they processed? Are you smoking too much? Are you drinking too much, right? Are you not sleeping? Are you in a toxic relationship or in a toxic workplace? And then you see that like, okay, there are all these areas where I'm potentially like losing my joy, but where do I want to prioritize? If you're someone who's always tired because of an autoimmune condition, maybe that's where you need to put your efforts first. If you're someone who socially is drinking too much caffeine and you're not getting good sleep, maybe that's where you need to work on, right? If you're someone psychologically who has unprocessed past trauma, maybe you're in fight or flight and it's really hard for your brain to access joy, right? So that way, when you map it out, you're like, oh, joy can be stolen from different avenues, but it can also be added back from different avenues.
That's really interesting. And I like how you say one at a time, because I think people always have this all or nothing mindset. Like, oh, I'm going to fix my brain and I'm going to do it all at once. But it's really impossible to do that. So I really like that approach of just choosing one thing that feels doable for you. And you also talked about trauma, which is really interesting to me, how that can lead to high functioning depression. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, in the study, we found that there were high rates of trauma or past pain. And that even when we were talking to people, because we did this through interviews, we didn't have like a survey go out. We spoke with people to really understand what was happening. Even when we were filling out these surveys, they were like, that's called trauma? Like, yeah, like when someone treated you poorly because of like the way you looked or rejected you because of how you identified from your who you loved, that is traumatizing. Like, oh, I just thought that happens to everyone in my community. Well, it does happen to a lot of people, but it's still painful, right? Two things can be true. So there were things in there that people like, oh, getting hit by my parent all the time, like, but it didn't leave a bruise and I never got Child Protective wasn't called, but I was constantly in fear. Like, that's trauma, So there are a lot of things that people don't necessarily acknowledge because they think of trauma as like combat, or they think of it as like something really, really bad happening that, that's like very, very dramatic.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be. So in the study, we delineated between big traumas and little traumas. And we found that there was a high correlation between high functioning depression and trauma. And the theory is that these folks don't shut down. A lot of people who go through trauma do shut down. So they're like the classic picture. But these folks don't. They end up busying themselves to distract from the trauma. So when they're sitting still and not doing work, they feel empty. When they're not busy, they feel restless, right? They're humans doing, not human beings. So we think that's the theory behind it. This is the first study ever done.
Wow.
I'm getting requests all over the world to replicate the study, which is good.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see what happens in other cultures and other countries. But I think there's something to distracting yourself and not slowing down enough to process that pain. The problem with that is if you don't slow down and process that pain and you keep pushing it down, then you also push down the ability to feel the joy. And then you're numb and you're feeling blah. You have anhedonia.
Right. Yeah, that anhedonia. So can you talk about what that is? So it's just you can't feel joy. Like you kind of, no matter what you're doing, you want to feel joy from a food that you like, but you just can't feel it. Is that what you're saying it is?
Yeah, it's like a diminished joy. Like
So everything's kind of numb.
Yeah, numb. Like you used to really love sushi, and then you just like eating the food and you're like, oh, I finished that already,
Yeah.
you know, like, or you used to really enjoy being around your friends, and now you're like, oh, I can't wait to go home.
Right.
Let's like wrap this up, you know?
Yeah.
So things that are like the basic joys in life, you know, that you should be deriving pleasure from, because as humans, we're built with the DNA for joy. It's literally in our DNA. So if you're not squeezing joy out of life and you're not feeling that, and you used to, that's a sign that something is happening, right?
Yeah. And with trauma, that big T, little t, I really want to like hone in on this because I feel like it's so important for people to hear. Like you don't have to have gone through something like SA to call it trauma. What are some things that you've seen maybe in clients that are little t trauma that still can really affect you?
Yeah, and in the DSM, that Bible psychiatry, when they look at trauma, they're very, very specific. And I've done like a ton of PTSD studies over the years. Time and time again, people come in and I'd be like, okay, this says that it has to be either like an essay or like combat or like something life-threatening. It has to be like really traumatic to meet criteria. But then people will come in all the time like, well, I was with a partner who like didn't talk to me and gave me the silent treatment and took away my money, and I was like financially, you know, basically tied to them, and they controlled me, and it was coercive control. And I'm like, I hate to tell you this, but that's not trauma in the book. And then you stop the recording and you're like, but I believe you. Yeah. But you can't be in this study because that doesn't count. And it's like crushing to people. Yeah. So I thought, okay, let me rewrite this trauma inventory to include more traumas. Yeah. Because we're going to miss out on a whole bunch of painful experiences. And I define trauma as painful, significant things that shaped you and shaped the way that you see yourself in the world and shaped the way that you interact with others, right? So it's not just like, okay, combat. Because like, how many, I'm sorry, it's important, but how many combat veterans do you know, right? Unless you work at the VA hospital. So I wanted to really include a lot of things. So things like that, painful relationships, things like scarcity trauma, where maybe either your parents didn't have resources or you ran out of resources. Maybe you went through a really bad bankruptcy and you were like literally living paycheck to paycheck and you were worried about what was going to happen to you. I wanted to include all of those things because I think that that puts people into fight or flight. Right. And it doesn't meet the textbook, but it's still significant.
How did you make sure culturally things were being like spread out in the study as well? Because I know people from different cultures have very different experiences when it comes to trauma, when it comes to mental health in general and talking about it. So how did you kind of factor that in?
Well, that's why we made sure to have interviews because we did get people from various cultural backgrounds. And I found, because I do clinical research, when I send out a survey, when a study that we do has like a self-reported survey, like basically you just say, this is the survey, fill it out. Yeah. Versus when you talk to someone, you get better results when you talk to them, because a lot of times patients will like fill out a survey and they're like, what am I going to eat for dinner tonight? And it's like, or like they don't understand a question. They don't want to look like stupid. So they just like guess one. And I'm like, we really wanted to understand. So when patients from different backgrounds were like, what does that mean? We explained it. And that was how we were able to capture the information, I think, accurately. Right. And we also had a section of the trauma inventory that included things like whether or not you were from a cultural background where people treated you poorly, right? So we wanted to include those type of experiences in that, because being rejected from a job because of your background and your religion is also important.
Right. What are some less likely kind of signs that would show up in everyday life that you might not think are high functioning depression, but actually are?
Definitely not being able to say no. Like I talk a lot about that in the book about people pleasing. Yeah. And there's a chapter devoted to something called masochistic personality disorder. And that used to be in the Bible of psychiatry. They took it out because it was problematic, because a part of masochism is like there's like almost like a victim blaming part of it. Like, oh, you find yourself in situations where people treat you poorly. You come back for more, even though, and it's like, this is very victim blaming.
When I was reading it, I was like, wait, that used to be me. Like, wait.
But the problem with masochistic personality disorders, they often diagnose women with it. Women in abusive relationships. So it was problematic. And so it had to be removed. But there are elements of it that are still used in clinical practice. Like psychiatrists will still say masochistic traits, but not personality disorder. Because you can't technically use that, right?
Right.
So it's essentially you're in these situations where you're not treated well. You're giving more than you're getting. You are uncomfortable with sometimes like healthy love and being praised and so forth. And also, really poor boundaries. You tend to say yes, 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 when you should be saying no, 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 right? So many folks don't realize that could be a symptom of high functioning depression because you don't feel worthy of saying no and resting. You just take on because God forbid you turn down something and you're not your role. You feel unlovable unless you're delivering. Yeah.
No, that was the craziest part. When I read that, I was like, wait, because I think a lot of people do find traits of that. But you're saying, but anyone with high functioning can have traits of that, you're saying. Yeah, it's really interesting, especially with the people pleasing. Another thing I wanted to talk about with anhedonia, I wanted to go back to that. One thing that you say for eliminating it is eliminating negative social media and gossip. Can you talk more about that? Because I was like, oh my God, I gossip all the time and I know it's bad, but what's actually behind this?
Well, we all have a need to vent, right? And one of the healing tools, I have this methodology called the 5 V's. And one of the V's is venting. And usually when I explain venting and people come to my lab, I'll blow up this big red balloon and they take turns pushing it into this tank of water. And we just had these high school students come to the lab and they want to be scientists. And they all took turns trying to push the balloon into the water. And 100% of the time it splashes out, right? Because there's a need to get that air out. You can't push it down. And I explained that that's how venting is. If we don't slowly get rid of some of that air, then it kind of pops up and makes a splash in ways that we can't control, right? And then the same students went and they took the deflated balloon and pushed it into the tank and it went down easily. To show them that it's really important to vent appropriately because then there's less resistance, there's less mess. You can control it. It's not going to pop up by snapping at your teacher, pop up in your work or in your health, right? So there's a need for us as humans to vent. Now, there are do's and don'ts to venting. You do want to vent to the right person. If you have a therapist, that's the best person. You don't have to be like, can I check in now? It's no, I'm paying you. I'm venting, right? But if it's someone who's a friend, you can't just be calling, okay, this is what happened, right? Because then it's whoa. Then you get into trauma dumping kind of territory, or it's not consensual, right? You want to ask for emotional consent. Is this a good time?
Right.
I'm dealing with something. Are you okay to deal with it? And many of us are guilty of this. I know with my sisters, I'm I need help. They're I'm at work, so we want to check in and say, is this okay?
Yeah.
And you want to pick the right people. You can't be venting to everyone because people gossip, and people, not everyone has your best intentions at heart, right? So some people will use what you tell them against you. Some will betray you. So you got to be really careful with who you share. So I often tell my clients okay, 1 or 2 people, and it's always the 1 or 2. And you had this agreement that whatever you talk about is confidential and you're not venting to gossip. Right. So it has to be with intention. You're trying to get something resolved. You're not actively gossiping because gossiping, it may feel good in the moment. And there's nothing wrong with a little here and there, but if you're using venting all the time as a form of gossiping, then it's not really resolving anything. Right. And the research shows that that actually makes people feel worse. It's they use analogy of pouring gas onto a fire. That's how bad you're becoming, you're feeling when you're not really venting with intention.
So when you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with, whatever thing you're going through in your life, you want to vent, and then when this feeling keeps coming up of the same thing, what do? Like if you just keep venting and then because I find that I'll gossip about the same things over and over and over again. And you're right, I never feel better. But it's like, then what? Like, what do you do?
I always say start with self-venting. There was a study that came out last year that looked at people who talk to themselves, not like in the psychotic way, but in the I have a problem and I'm going to talk it out loud to myself. And what they found was that those people actually felt better, that when they actually dealt with the problem face to face with the person or the individual or whatever it was at work, the situation, they actually had more clarity. They were happier with the outcome, right? So like I always say, start with venting to yourself. And it could be verbal, it could be in writing, like in a journal. Because what you're doing is you're unpacking your feelings in a way that you start to separate the feelings from the thoughts, and you start to actually get more clarity as to what's happening. And then when you're in the room with the other person or dealing with the situation, you just have more information, right? You took the time to understand, again, the science of your happiness, right? So like when you're with the other person, maybe that other person hasn't done what you did, and you're in a more regulated space, and maybe they're dysregulated, and you're able to say, oh, let's step back a bit.
Right.
But if the two of you are just walking into this thing dysregulated, that is a whole mess there, right? Yeah. So I often say, like, start with self-venting. And then when you do the face-to-face and you still don't come up with a resolution, then you move from there.
That's interesting. In your book, you always say that not everyone who is depressed is sad. So how do you explain that then? Like, and I know we kind of touched on this before, but I think so many people are functioning in their everyday life, but they're not feeling that sadness. So then how do you know, like, how do you check yourself and say like, oh, am I suffering from this, or am I going through something? Like, how does a person check in with themselves?
Yes, even with clinical depression, you don't have to have a sad mood. That often surprises a lot of people. But literally when you go through that checklist, the criteria is you either have a low mood or you have something called anhedonia. Right. You have to have one of those two. Gotcha. And then you add on the other checklist symptoms to meet criteria for clinical depression. And that's the same criteria I used for the high functioning depression protocol. You have to have one of the two, either sadness or anhedonia. Right. But we also measured anhedonia separately just because I felt like that was more what you see with people who don't feel and don't process, they push through. But yeah, one of the two. And I often say to my patients, imagine that like depression is like twin sisters, right? They're not identical. One sister is sad and in bed all day. The other sister is just feeling numb. Which one do you think gets the most attention, right? The one who's sad, crying in bed. The one who's numb, no one has any idea what's going on, right? And that's why those who have anhedonia but not sadness, they get missed. They're flying under the radar. So I wanted to make this information available. And when I started talking about anhedonia on socials, like my social media, I was on a show, a podcast, and I started talking about anhedonia, and like literally in one day, 10,000 people filled out the survey. Wow. Based on that one podcast. Wow. So I was like, people really want to know about this. Yeah. It crashed my website.
That's crazy.
So I was like, wow, I need to start talking more about this. Yeah. Something that, I see all day in the research that sounds like boring to us. People are like, that's me. I just didn't know what it was.
Yeah. I recognize it even when I was learning about it, reading, I was thinking of other people in my life who I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. So I think even for the awareness of like someone you love, it's important to just know what it is and know what the signs are. So the 5 V's, we have to talk about the 5 V's. Can you like go through them and kind of take us through why each is important? I know we already talked about venting, but validation we can start with.
Yeah, when you think about the 5 V's, think about like your 5 fingers. And you know how I said that we're built with the DNA for joy? So like I tell my patients, really tap into one of those every day, 1 or 2, no more than that. And imagine like reclaiming your joy. And so the first V is validation. And validation is important because it's literally accepting your feelings and your experiences without judgment, which I think is very difficult for those with HFD to do because they're used to pushing down their pain. And I often ask them to like close their eyes in the session and just like imagine a time when like something bad happened to you and like you never told anyone, you don't like talking about it, and just say to yourself, it happened to me. It's not my fault. I'm still worthy of love, care, and respect. I'm still worthy of love, care, and respect. And then open your eyes. And it's like, okay, I just self-validated, right? But we often seek validation from other people. We don't self-validate enough. And I explained that, like, if you're not validating yourself that bad things happen and it's not your fault and you're still worthy, then what happens is that you internalize that blame, you never get help, and then people pick up on it and they treat you differently. Like when my patients start to self-validate and they start saying, I am worthy, I can't say no, people start noticing and they're like, let me leave this person alone. Let me respect their boundaries. But they can always pick up on what you're projecting out. And then the second V is venting. We went through that, like how important it is to get rid of, or just express those emotions. And, the third one is values. Basically, think about the things in life that bring you meaning and purpose on a deeper level. So in my book, I have this chart where I talk about the upper level values and then the lower level values. So we all need the superficial stuff. We need money, we need housing and all that stuff. But there are these deeper values that we also need to feel really full, with joy. And that's things that, bring you purpose, like your family, causes that you believe in. For some people, it's nature. That happens a lot with my clients. They move to a big city and they forget that, like, I don't feel joyful. I don't know why. And I'm like, well, where did you move from? And it used to be that they were like camping or hiking or on the beach. And now they're like stuck in like a tiny apartment. Well, no wonder, right? Like you got to go out and like, walk in the park, So really understand what your values are and tap into that.
Yeah.
For my clients, I ask them to write their values on like little value stones and to keep them in your purse or at your work. And when you're feeling lost, like pull it out and hold on to it. And there's something in psychiatry called a transitional object. When patients are, let's say they go to the hospital and they have to stay there for a crisis, bring something with you that you can hold on to, because we need something to help us to stay grounded. So the value stones remind you of that. The fourth V is vitals, how to support your body and your brain, because the mind-body connection is really important. And a lot of folks with HFD don't take care of their bodies. So there's the 3 traditional vitals, like most doctors will tell you about: your diet, eat things that are like not too sugary or processed, eat brain foods like, blueberries and omega-3 fatty acids. And then your sleep. Everybody needs sleep to feel restored, to think better, to feel better. Movement, we need that every day. We don't get enough of that when we're overworking. But there are 3 non-traditional vital signs. And I think the relationship with technology is a struggle for those with HFD. We're always on our screens. And there was a study last year out of one of the Texas schools, University of Texas schools, where they took the smartphone away from adults and they gave them like flip phones for 4 weeks. And what they found was that after 4 weeks, their happiness scores were as if they had been treated with an antidepressant. So they were like, well, what's going on here? So they interviewed them and they were like, what's happening? And they're like, well, I'm getting better sleep because I'm not on my phone. I'm actually spending time in nature. I'm more active. I'm actually talking to my friends, like having conversations, feeling more connected. So like the devices can really steal your joy. And then the other non-traditional vital signs are what we talked about: people. Being around toxic people literally will drain your life force. There are these studies coming out of Harvard showing that like they really, like, relationships matter. They can either extend your life or shorten it. And then the third non-traditional vital sign is like our work-life balance, like how to leave work at work and have a life outside of work.
So many people, I feel like, struggle with that one. Especially, do you find that then people that live in big cities actually have lower like happiness scores?
It depends. Like some studies show that they do have lower happiness scores for many reasons. They tend to have less space. They tend to be financially strapped, right? They're not getting nature. They're not out and about. When you see a sunset and you see water and you see just the trees, like there's something called awe. It's a point of joy that we measure in the research. And you start to want, like, you're like, wow, the universe is amazing. I'm here for a reason. That's that sense that you get. You're not getting that as much. And also there's like so much pollution and the hustle and the grind. So a lot of those factors can take away from your joy. But then there are people who live out in rural areas who are like, I just want to be in the big city because no one here understands me, right?
Right.
But there generally is a lower sense of happiness in people living in cities.
And what about self-sabotage? I feel like so many people that I've spoken to that seem to maybe suffer from depression or high functioning depression also suffer from this awful self-sabotage of like, I don't deserve to be happy, but also it's such a subconscious thing. How does that connect?
Well, the fifth V is vision. A lot of times they're not planning joy, right? They'll plan everything else in life down to a T. They'll plan their work. They'll plan their schedules. They'll plan even like, okay, I'm off for vacation, but not really plan the vacation in a way that's joyful. Like it's like, I got to see this family member, or I got to do this on vacation. And none of it is really truly joyful, right? So I think a lot of it is that they're not planning joy, and also they're not celebrating their wins. It's always on to the next.
Yep.
It's always like, when I get this job, then I'll be happy. When I get this partner, then I'll be happy. And I explain to my patients that like, okay, what you're describing is this external idea, right? Like when I get all of these things, I'll be happy. But the data shows us that when people think that way, they're still not happy even when they get the things. So they have to shift and start to prioritize joy, which is different than happiness. Joy is like the internal experience, the slowing down, the being present. Yeah. So like today, let me sit and eat my salad and not in front of my computer. Let me go for a walk through the park and not be on my phone, like on social media. Let me actually like feel the grass, Let me laugh with my friends and not be trying to like make a video about it, right? So all of those things are how to squeeze the experience of joy in the present instead of living in the future for this idea of happiness.
Can you give a couple examples of like what's happiness? Like what is that feeling of happiness? Kind of those like, I feel like it's more of like a hit versus joy is more steady. How would you like describe it to someone that's trying to figure out what is what?
Happiness, I think, is more of like an idea. It's like this destination, right? When I ask my patients, what is happiness to you? It's always something happening. Yeah. Versus joy is this internal, sustainable experience that you cultivate, which a lot of my patients with high functioning depression, it's hard for them to grapple with, right? Because they're not accustomed to slowing down. And so I'll do this experiment with them, this exercise with them, where like I have a glass of water or a tea, and I'm like, hold the glass. I'm gonna teach you how to be present in the most basic way, and you're gonna list 5 things that you can see. So they'll describe, and it's usually tea. They'll describe, okay, I see the light flickering off of the liquid. I see the color of the tea leaves. I see the glass. I see my hand under the glass. Okay, 5 things that you saw. List 4 things that you can feel. Okay, I feel the warm glass. I feel the steam coming on my nose. I feel the cushion under my chair. I feel the carpet under my feet. Okay, so now I want you to list 3 things that you can hear. Okay, so I hear the water. I hear my fingertips. I hear my breath coming in as I scent the water. And then 2 things that you can smell. Usually it's chamomile lavender. Then you taste it. 1 thing you could taste. And I had them literally do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then I'm like, okay, were you thinking about your meeting? No. Were you thinking about what you ate last night? No. Were you thinking about your problematic boyfriend? No. What were you thinking about? I was like really enjoying this like cup of tea. I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. That's joy. You're literally being present in a moment, and you're all about this one thing, and you're savoring it. Yeah. And so as they start doing that, what I do is I assign them, these small experiences, like try to lengthen it out. Like it's 5 minutes today. Then next week it's 7 minutes, and you build upon that. And then what they start to do is like literally when they're in their lives, when a friend is talking to them, they're like literally like, oh really? And they're being present. It's like the friend is like, something's different about you. I want that, because it's contagious. Yeah. That lack of joy is contagious, but also joy is contagious. When people see it and it's authentic, they want it.
Yeah, it's something that I feel like also people listening can easily implement that. And I so love when we can actually take something with us, because I think so often we talk about things, but I'm a type of person that's very action oriented. I'm like, what can I do? Like, what can I do today that's going to like help me? So I feel like that's a really good place to start. Just like that 5 minutes of mindfulness, even if it sounds cliche, but it's not the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think that's like a really good place to start. So I love that. And I also just feel like I had a meditation session. I'm like, wait, I'm getting into it. We have to wrap up in a couple minutes, but can you plug yourself and your book and anywhere that anyone can find help from you or another resource for high functioning depression that you want to plug?
Yeah, you can follow me on all the socials, Dr. Judith Joseph, and then my website, drjudithjoseph.com. You can buy my book anywhere that books are sold. I have a podcast called The Vault, and I have a blog.
Amazing.
And a newsletter.
Yay. Amazing. Thank you so, so much for being here. You are so full of wisdom, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.